I think every kid was a dinosaur kid, a tractor kid, or something else. Well, I was the former, so of course as an adult I spent a lot of money to buy tons of plastic dinosaur toys. Hey guys, it's Ryan and today is something entirely different. I will be covering the old world. In particular, I will be going through and giving my thoughts on the Lizardman Legacy Army list. I'll be looking at someone who wants to win at clubs and maybe do well at tournaments, but not a competitive 5-0 player. No skink spam here. I'm not that good, nor am I interested in doing that. I also refuse to write off a unit unless it's really not great. If you are one of my Infinity fans, I will be covering Infinity soon, but this is something I've wanted to do in the meantime until we have N5. If you want to stick around, that would really be great. This is going to be a big video. It would also be really helpful if you like and subscribe for more. I will maybe cover the old world a bit more if this does well. I'll start with the army composition as it informs a lot about the lists, which are a bit more important than a list in Infinity. Army composition for the Lizardmen is a bit of a mixed bag, and I'll explain why as I'll go. But first, the battle standard bearers. It can either be a skink chief, a Saurus Scar veteran, and uniquely our Slan can be our battle standard bearer, but also our general at the same time. This means a really nice little command bubble. Also, since all three can be mounted or are large targets, all three could have a command bubble of 18 inches, which really helps get those rerolls when needed. Although usually battle standard bearers tend to remain embedded within units just for the buffs their standard can bring. Character wise, it's what you expect from the Lizardmen. Slans are level 4 lizards, Saurus Oldbloods are combat lords, skink priests, minor wizards, and Scar veterans and skink chiefs are our combat heroes. 0 to 1 slans per army is a classic Warhammer fantasy battle stuff. It just means we're restricted to 1 level 4 wizard total. Not that I think running 2 slans would be good, but it does kind of sting since we have no level 3s and only get 1/2s as another option. In the current meta of the old world, you really want to take one, and now this is my first gripe. Our combat lord, the Saurus Oldblood, and our minor wizard, our skink priest, share 0 per 1 per 1000 points, which at 2000 points sure doesn't matter, but any less you're really not getting a minor wizard and combat lord until 1.5 or 2k points, which is a little frustrating. Old blood slap, and I basically have to force myself not to take one since I'm playing Lizardman for big dinosaurs and he gets the Carnosaur. Skink priests are nice, but having 2 problems that makes this choice worse. It is at best a level 2 wizard and does not join units neatly given it's on a 25mm and our entire army is basically on 30s or bigger. It can join 30mm base models, but it's off to the side at risk of a flank or rear charge. So our main offense and defense against lords is held back by a chump who can do parlor tricks, which is not ideal. After that we do get unlimited Scar veterans and chiefs, which alongside the last 2 heroes can be mounted on monsters that, while cannot tangle with the dragon, will slap most things down anyway. Ultimately a decent character section with maybe only the chiefs struggling for places in lists. Core continues with the mixed thoughts, but is ultimately good. So first requirement is the 1+ Saurus Warriors. Legacy armies and some support armies do need 1+ units, but Saurus Warriors suffer little from just being infantry in this edition. Most people tend to respond to this by taking the minimum 10 or 12 and then maxing the core requirements with skinks, or taking 20 warriors and then filling the rest of the core with skinks. As you can tell, your core is likely to be skinks, which are fantastic, and Saurus Warriors, which is kinda nice. I also quite like the other 2 core options. Jungle Swarms are one of 3 swarms in the game, are really good at just taking a target and forcing them to spend 2 or 3 rounds of combat just to break through them. Now this is my second gripe for the core though. I love Temple Guard, they're better Saurus Warriors and I have sentimental value with them, but the gripe is being better Saurus Warriors you can take 1 max in the army total, which is a bit meh to be honest. Really this should go back to the press release version and go back to 0 to 1 per 1000 points. It honestly wouldn't be the worst thing, but it will continue to constantly live in the shadow of being infantry in the old world and always needing to take 1+ Saurus Warriors. Our special section is where the fun stuff is, although again it's got some not good and some good. I'll be quick and say we got unlimited Croxagors, Chameleon Skinks, and both are nice and worth considering. Bastiladons are 0 to 2 per 1000 points, and honestly worth considering for the solar lasers. Then you get cold ones, who are nice, but have a big old asterisk, and then there are the riders, who are in need of a look at. The riders are locked behind Chief, which isn't bad or anything, but they're just not very effective, as pterodons don't do enough damage in melee or shooting, and Riperdactyls are 360 degree vision impetuous, so it's very hard, if not impossible, to control consistently, so it can take more skill than it's worth, and even then their melee isn't stellar, being completely sans AP, even if you can max out at 5 attacks per model. Could be a good gimmick, but maybe not. Rare is again mixed, but I'm saying that a lot. I like the allowances here, it feels fair, either a Salamander or Razordon per 1000 points, and a Stegodon versus Trogs. Well, it's not even close. You can slap hard with Stegodons, and Trogs just need a hand. I don't have a problem with special or rare. It's well thought out composition wise. There's just the underlying units are an issue. The Slan is pretty much an icon of the Lizardmen, and their stats reflect the fact they are a fat old frog in a wheelchair, with 2s and 3s and everything except 5 wounds and leadership 9. This means unless you are not running him, he will be your very large, very lizardy wizard general. All Slans are level 4 casters, and those are pretty needed these days, and they get a good choice between battle magic, elementalism, high magic, illusion, and necromancy. I don't think there's a bad choice here. I'm more partial to high magic or elementalism for its buffing ability, but battle magic could be very strong to keep the pressure on your opponent. If you're not a fan of one of those spells, you do get the Lore of Lustria, which is really just basically Monsoon. You're taking to throw down, block line of sight, and a huge debuff for shooting war machines. He's not a fighter, but he can take 1000 points of magical items, and largely is going to probably be spent on arcane items, probably familiar of some kind, and power and dispel scrolls. But not necessarily, as we get a thing called Disciplines of the Old Ones, our character customization gimmick for the Slan, and they are very good. To round off the Slan, you get no armor but a 5+ ward save, cold-blooded, close order, fly 8, which is really nice just to stay out of combat, large target, and the Lore of Lustria. Large target means you basically will be seen across from the board, except if there are hills, but your command range is bigger. However, due to being a monstrous creature, you can't join units like Temple Guard like you used to be able to. Skinks and Croxigores are the other losers in this introduction of Clumsy. This just makes the Slan far more vulnerable to being shot, and importantly, just wastes a lot of spells that are caster and the unit they have joined. Also makes the Battle Standard Bearer a little redundant too, but if you want to save some points and you want a BSB, it's not a bad idea. Disciplines take your Slan from a potential liability to a potential magical powerhouse. They range from 10 to 60 points, but there are some clear standout ones and some that are pretty nice to consider. Soul of Stone is nice and cheap and could save you from big damage, but ultimately not really worth much. Harrowing Scrutiny I think is useless, as you're not really going to get much use out of that terror, as I don't think you want to charge your Slan into combat, and you generally want to avoid being charged. Sorcerer's Void, now that's a little better if inconsistent. Remember, an Obsidian Lodestone is 20 points and not unique, so if you really want magic resistance, spend those points instead of one of your disciplines. Transcendent Healing could be interesting to give it a 5+ regen to avoid taking damage. In this case, if you can't afford a later discipline, but you're basically giving only a 5-up ward into a 5-up regen, which is still giving them combat res. It's nice, but another one is better. Wandering Deliberations, I'm not certain on, but it could be good. There are some really nice signature spells there from High Magic, Elementalism, and Battle Magic, Demonology, and Dark Magic. Look good too. If you have a plan, I think this could work. Becalming Conjuration is another one I think could be a very good once per turn reroll of a dispel, which could be good enough to stop in a big incoming spell, and an extra 3-inch range dispel is great, as you're now a 27-inch range, which might be more than enough to really flex on level 3 and 4 casters. I'm sure better players than I know if this is worth it, but I'm not sure if it is for 50 points, unless I get better at the positioning game. Finally, and I think the strongest, is Higher State of Mind, and for 60 points, you're ethereal, which means you can ignore terrain and just ignore all weapons unless magical, and with move 8 you can outrun the infantry, but the enemy characters and casters are to be feared. But with Temple Guard, you'll feel far safer, and honestly, the only reason I've lost my Ethereal Slan was basically from getting caught when charged by a flying monster. I always take this, but it's 60 points, and that is 2/3 of a Scar Veteran or an entire skink unit. It's a chunk of points, but damn, it's good. Overall, I think you're taking slans unless you're not getting whacked with magic, and usually I build Lore Familiar, pick a spell lore, maybe Lore of Lustria Monsoon, opponent depending, take Ethereal and just float around denying spells and dropping my own as I please. Powerful, but a very vulnerable piece. Saurus heroes are largely very similar, which is not a bad thing. It is our fighting lord and our fighting hero for 90 points for the Scarvet and 140 points for the Old Blood. They both have cold-blooded, so leadership 8, and will hold firm, Furious Charge, which is very nice, and honestly makes them a force to be reckoned with, especially when compounded with mounts and magical weapons. Obsidian Blades, which is our faction-wide AP-1 hand weapons, and Rallying Cry to bring back fleeing units. The extra 50 points of an Old Blood gets you weapon skill 6/5, a 3rd wound, a 5th attack, and an extra 50 points magical allowance, which you will make good use of. As a standard, they have heavy armor innately, as most Lizardmen do, hand weapons, and can join Saurus units no problem. They take additional hand weapons, cavalry spears, great weapons or halberds, maybe a shield, and be mounted on a cold one or Carnosaur. I don't think there's a bad choice here depending on magic item loadout. Additional hand weapons might be the worst, but with 6 attack on a charge and a magic items with poison, it might be okay, but you are giving up AP1. Cavalry spears are nice and cheap, but magic items could replace easily. Great weapons are nice, but the aforementioned poison buff to really skip any wound shenanigans. Halberd is the same, but without strike last, and the strength +2, and the AP2. I think if you're running cheat kernels and can't find a magical weapon, any of the last 3 will do with a shield, just to give you strength 6 to basically wound all infantry on 2, and with strength 7 from a great weapon, you're well into monster slaying territory, and if you're on a Carnosaur, you will be doing that. We should really talk about mounts and builds because there are a few ways to rock your Saurus out. You have 3. Battle Sniper Bear in a unit, which you can focus on dueling, supporting a unit, and having a big stick to help wave around. The other 2 are Carnosaurs and Cold Ones. Cold Ones are pretty decent mounts with 2 attack apiece on strength 4 with Fear and Armor Bane. It's not bad, and it will get character from point A to B. Their move 7 with Stress Drive, so you're actually quite likely to make a decent charge. The big downside to all Cold Ones is they are stupid. And literally, with leadership 8, that's not feeling a good chance to not be stupid. And as a final kick in the teeth, Cold-Blooded no longer applies to stupidity, just panic, fear, and terror. You can take a Horn 1 to move up to move 8 and remove stupidity, but it's a 10-point magic item tax, which hits the score Scar Veteran hard, and even the Old Blood isn't a huge fan either. Even if you're committed to running this solo, as stupidity from the Cold 1 will make the Horn 1 stupid, so if you're embedding this in with other cavalry, just leave it without the upgrade and focus the points on something else. The Old Blood could be a solo harasser, but this is a huge risk of getting just shot off the board. The Carnosaur, however, is very nice and is obviously solo. If you want to have 2 Carnosaurs in the list, you'll want a Scar Veteran. Trust me on that, it's hard to make 2 Old Bloods Carnosaurs worthwhile. Carnosaurs add 4 wounds and 1 toughness to its rider, which is pretty good and will need other monsters to really have a go at you. It's also move 7 and Swift Stride with Terror, so you will be charging and you will be getting things to flee, which is very nice. The big thing besides the wounds, the Carnosaur makes our fighting lord a monster, but not dragon, slayer. Basically anything below a dragon will fear a Carnosaur from its D3 damage, AP2 claw attacks against the monster, and the Saurus Old Blood own weapon. Not only have you got 2 stomps at AP2 unless you're fighting a monster, and you can get Frenzy if you get a wound through, meaning a charged Carnosaur Old Blood has 8 attacks, but a charging one has 10 attacks if Blood Frenzied. My go-to loadout for a Carnosaur is 407 points. An Old Blood Shield Carnosaur Ogre Blade Talisman of Protection, which gives me a Strength 7 AP2 D3 damage dinosaur on another Strength 7 AP2 D3 damage dinosaur, and that is why we play Lizardmen. Dinosaurs riding dinosaurs. Like I said, this will punch monsters hard unless it's a dragon. I love it. Finally, I guess the Scar Veteran can similarly be taken but won't have big guns or big armor. You kind of get one or the other, so be careful, but a great weapon is also a respectable weapon when you are strength 5 base, so keep that in mind. I like Venom of the Firefly Frog for that poison attack with 5 attacks on the charge for 15 points. Unfortunately, skink heroes are drastically different from each other. Skink priests are level 1/2 wizards with basically the same stat line as a skink, but the ability to cast spells from battle magic, elementalism, or illusion. And since they are on 25mm, they can join units and can be useful as your buff units. Priests can be mounted on an Ancient Stegodon and given 50 points of magical items. Ancient Stegodon slap, and I'll get to them later. The skink priest may spend 30 points to become a level 2 wizard, but the rules are where we have to look for the real nice stuff. It has Cold-Blooded Aquatic, which just treats rivers as normal terrain, Lore of Rustria, which means you get Monsoon for more templates, fun, and finally Arcane Vassal, which allows the Slan once per turn, assuming the skink isn't in combat or fleeing, to measure line of fire and all effects from the skink and not the Slan, basically expanding the range another 12 inches. And if I'm understanding this correctly, you need to be within the range of the Slan to make the Dispel, not the Arcane Vassal, since the Slan is still casting the spell, just the effects are going off via the skink. I don't think that's intended, but rules as written, that's what it does. That makes your Slan much safer and is as a ton of utility to your level 1 wizards. Given that also could be a Stegodon, you're going to get a lot more value for this little guy. Skink Chiefs are our other fighter, although far worse than even the Scar Veterans, but they exist as a sort of ranged hero. Cheap Battle Standard Baron, I guess, jack of all trades, master of none. They can take shields and either additional hand weapons, cavalry spears, blowpipes, or javelins, and honestly, with across the board poison attacks, there's not a wrong answer, but with his BS5, the javelin might be the best choice, as I think you can take a magic weapon to deal with the stuff in melee. Anyway, with weapon skill 4 and toughness 3, I don't really think you want him close unless you're in a unit carrying a banner for them or on the back of a dinosaur, which I think is the best way here. Worth noting, they are initiative 6, which is our single fastest unit in the faction, and that's why I think he'll do better with the dinosaur, basically trying to do some damage before they can strike back, or in a unit as some sort of challenge handler. He can also only take 50 points of magical items, which is tight, so be smart. Mount-wise, they have access to Stegodons, non-ancients, which is my pick since you can use that BS5 on the weapon, a Pterodon, which make him fast but doesn't do much for him in combat, and finally a Ripperdactyl, which is basically feral and has issues. The last two will up his toughness to 4 and a 3rd wound, and somewhat worth considering to lead a unit of these flyers or use as a missile to try and knock out artillery. Our flyers aren't good though, and he doesn't fix them. The Stegodon, however, gets the better shooting, more wounds to help out, and if it's a battle standard bearer, a nice large command range to get buffs from, especially since you can give a Stegodon Armor Bane, Stubborn, or have 3 combat res before you even start stomping. Our banners aren't great, but that's another issue. Overall, a nice unit, but I don't see it often and try it often, so I don't really have a build to recommend or try. It could be a cheap battle standard bearer if you don't want to bring a Scar Veteran, but the Scar Veteran I think is worth the extra 45 points. As previously mentioned, I really like the Temple Guard. They're really solid with weapon skill, toughness and strength 4, 2 attacks apiece with leadership 8. That's nice, but now here's the problem we have army-wide. Saurus are move 4, so faster than dwarves, but initiative 1. And that's big. Dwarves outspeed us, and that means we're going to struggle, but those 2 attacks do really help us. Additionally, these guys are heavy armor, shield, and AP on hand weapons and halberds, very decisive if you can get a charge off. Basically, they're limited warriors of chaos, but they're capable of handling the bed lags, wounding ogres, Bretonnian knights, and black orcs on 3s with their halberds, and if you want to be more grindly, which right now might not be great, you have that AP1 hand weapon and shield, stubborn, and shield wall to make sure you stick around. You will be initiative 1 after the first round, which is when you're going to start losing combat, as most of your front line might end up gone by the time you get to slap back, but still you've got some nice staying power. Full command is available and will net you 1 extra attack, and you can buy magical banners and 50 points of magical items on your champion, which is a lot and could make the unit almost self-sufficient. I really like the idea of a cheeky Ruby Ring of Ruin to blast stuff that wants to get fresh before it does. The final big gimmick, and why I think they've gone for 0 to 1 per army, is the Guardian ability. Slan can't join them anymore, which is a real shame, but if you're within 3 inches of a Slan on a 2+, you can take the shot for the Slan. It suffers a hit, so the wound roll is against the Temple Guard's toughness, and you take the entire blow. This gives the Slann a 2+, 5+, and if you're ethereal, this probably won't matter. Although I believe this includes magic missiles, I'm not quite sure though. The final part of Guardian is that when within command range of the Slann, 9 inches if not your general, 18 if you are, you can accept and issue challenges as if you were a character, which means these guys could in theory just sandbag big monsters until your Carnosaurs come in to save you. Saurus warriors are worse temple guards, but in that you have to pay for shield wall, they're 1 less weapon strength and they're not stubborn. But then they get full command AP on hand weapons and only 25 points of champion magic items. You do, however, get the option for thrusting spheres, which is very nice for a hold the line unit, meaning each front line not to kill gives 3 attacks but no AP, which is probably enough to rebuff an assault somewhat. Since they're heavy infantry, you also don't get massively penalised if flanked and only need a rank of floor to cling on to that rank bonus just a little longer. Overall, since you need to take Saurus warriors, decide if you want to take like 10 or 12 to just watch a flank, or take 20 and make it a bit more of an immovable brick. I don't believe either is wrong. It is worth mentioning here that I think Saurus warriors are good enough generally that any benefit to rebalance infantry and general rules changes that could occur will only positively affect them. Even if step up and only support attacks could be made on a step up, this would be huge for the slow but very hard hitting Saurus. Skink skirmishers are good. If you've seen competitive lists, they are everywhere. I'm talking about 60 in a list. And people really like poison attack, skink spam. And I can see why. They're not good profiles, but they're good enough platforms for javelins that eventually you will kill something. They are skirmishers with move 6, weapon skill, toughness 2, BS and strength 3, and initiative 4 with leadership 5, so they break all the time. But for 50 points you get 10 of them, which have light armor and javelins, which is move and shoot and quick shoot, and a shield, and the options for scout and vanguard with move through cover. So in theory you can close the gap and lob 10 javelins with poison attacks on a 5+, which is very nice, and you could say bring 60 of them and you're going to get something eventually. Now you do have options to lose shields to get blowpipes, but don't. I generally think blowpipes are awful. Sure, extra shots, but you're going to be effectively a -2 in most other situations and lose march and shoot, which is big on a mobility unit. That -2 is far more likely to be a -3 and will just kill the poison attacks, which is what you want for mass javelin attacks. It doesn't work out given the 12-inch range on both weapons, and the strength 3 attacks really need the auto wound for poison. Also, the patrol leader is not worth it unless you really want that +1 to hit. He can just get challenged and killed easier, and you will die in melee with skinks. I know skinks aren't fantastic fighters, but I was really sad to see no close order or open order skinks units like the cohorts of Warhammer Fantasy Battle days, and would love to see them back and working with Croxagores again. But until then, skink skirmishers rock. Chameleon skinks are basically the same as skinks, but have innate evasion and scouts. They also only have blowpipes, which you'd think I dislike, but I'm a bit more ambivalent about this, as chameleon skinks are BS4 compared to 3, so that's good enough that you're mathematically basically the same as skinks, with javelins despite being 5 points more for half the number of troops. This is nice, not great, but nice. Absolutely worth bringing chameleon skinks for the same reason you'd bring skinks, to move up the board and shoot stuff to death. At double the cost of the super cheap skinks, it is worth considering if you want them, but in theory it would let you have 6 units of skinks, even in a rule of 3 tournament, even if the next 30 were twice as much in cost. Croxagore are not smart beasts, but they are yet more anti-monster melee, with weapon skill 3, move 6, strength 5 with great weapons for strength 7, AP 2 attacks on a toughness 4, 3 wound, initiative 3, and a 3 attacks monstrous infantry with leadership 7, also rocking heavy armor. Croxagores want to hunt down and tie down those non-mounted monsters, as they should be able to peel through them. It is also a good infantry sweeper as well, wounding even toughness 5 on 2s. Croxagore are designed to keep up with skinks as they are aquatic, aforementioned move 6, cold-blooded, close order, fear, which is actually useful on Crocs, as each one is unit set strength 3, so bringing 4, which I think is what you want to do, means you should be able to get fear on most skirmishers and smaller blocks of cavalry and infantry. Unfortunately, we don't get the old Kroxigor ability that lets them join skinks, but we do get skirmish screen, which is fantastic. Basically, Kroxigors do not count skinks as line of sight blocking, and as such can move through them while they are in skirmish formation. Even if you end up on top, you can nudge them out the way and then count coherencies via the Kroxigor if needed. Important bit about this, they're not large targets, and therefore you can see over the skinks, but not your enemy. And as such, you can basically screen with your skirmishers to take shooting and the charges for the Kroxigor, and then when the skinks are dead or thematically out of javelins to lend to your opponent, you can charge the Kroxigors in, and they do damage. Finally, for infantry, and yes, somehow technically infantry is jungle swarms. Remember, the true weapons of war are the snakes we found along the way. Jungle swarms are basic swarms, weapon skill 2, strength and toughness 2, but importantly there are 3 of them with 5 wounds and 5 poison attacks apiece. So you can eventually ground stuff down with that, and you will draw things to a grinding halt again with 5 wounds per base, immunity to psychology, and unbreakable. These are staples in my list. I take 3 and just send them on a flank every game. They've died to a snake after like 2 or 3 turns of wasting and tying up very expensive models. With Vanguard in move 5 and a willingness to charge and be charged just to sandbag things, while my cool dinosaurs can do literally anything else, they can really shine on their own, are fairly reliable against non-monsters. I also kit bashed mine from Saurus Knights and Bastillodon kits, so they cost me literally nothing. Salamander packs are our dino stand-in for war machines, and this is our stand-in for the flame cannon, which is not a great war machine, and the salamander isn't great either. How it works is that you get at least 3 skinks for every 1 salamander for a true unit cost of 90 points. The salamander is the bulk of the points, and with move 6 is pretty agile, but it has some downsides on why I think it's the worst boar beast. It's the most expensive of the two and largely only has a breath weapon, which is okay with strength 4 and AP 1. Perfect anti-infantry, but templates aren't great in my opinion. With strength 5 AP 2 melee attacks, it should be able to hold off most things in melee, but you really can't stand and shoot at all, so it's going to hurt. This unit and the Lizardmen are somewhat protected against shooting, with essentially a random chance to hit a beast or a skink handler. On a 5+, it hits the skink, and you'll want it to do that. They've not even got javelins, they exist to die. Anyway, they're okay, but they're anti-infantry in addition, where infantry isn't great. Razordons are a little better being cheaper and having a real range attack with its razor barbs. It's BS4 with move and shoot and quick shoot. With multi-shots, D3 means that in theory you could turn 1, march up and throw D3 shots out on probably 5s, which is not great, but it's not awful. Really, you want 2 Razordons in a unit, as it's not that pricey and they could do some damage with some nice middle range weapons. They're not as mobile as say Pterodons, but they damn well do more damage than them. Cold One Riders are fairly decent heavy cavalry, but have 2 major downsides. They are 34 points per model, 35 if you want cavalry spheres, even more for drilled, and stupidity. Same as the Saurus Heroes leadership makes it a bit of a risky pick. But this aside, it's not actually too bad. Why? Well, per model you get 4 attacks, 2 on weapon skill 4 with either hand weapons or cavalry spears, and 2 from the cold ones who mentioned earlier have weapon skill 3, strength 4, and 2 attacks apiece. They're also our highest armor save unit with heavy armor, shield, and armored hide 1, so a 3+ armor save. That's not bad. They get the option to take 50 points of banners. I've enjoyed the meme of Armor Bane banner so that everyone has AP 2, but the cold ones have Armor Bane 3 as a laugh. It's a laugh, it's not great. But we do have like 3 banners that could work. The Frenzy banner, the Anti-Stand-and-Shoot banner, and the Pursuit banner. There are options here to make these really nice cavalry, but the stupidity will sit over there, over your shoulder, and could come in at the worst time. I have 15, and I haven't found an amazing use for them. But I reckon there are some, especially if we get ways to mitigate stupidity. Now, I know I was negative about cold ones, but I think they're a diamond in the rough. But Pterodons I'm far less happy with. They are 2 points less and are skinks, which means we don't have fighters on Pterodon who are not fighters. Okay, but maybe they're more of a range focus, yeah? I mean, yes, but javelins or fire leech bolas, which are cool, not really as effective as javelins. They are 2 wounds a model, toughness 3. They're a little tankier, but still a 5+ armor save. The best gimmick here is that you can march 20 inches and then, once per game, drop some rocks for D3 strength 4 hits per model in the unit that moved over another unit. This is, well, not much. I think a unit of 5 with maybe a skink chief could be decent, but you don't want them in combat, so they kind of get left to the side to maybe pepper something ineffectively. I think they could be improved by buffing their rider or letting skinks throw out more range attacks. Ripperdactyls, I think, are worth the points. Sort of. Not really. Kinda. It's 40 points per model with 3 attacks, totaling 4 on the charge, cleaving blow on the Ripperdactyls, and toad rage. Let's break that down though. The 3 attacks are on weapon skill 2 and 3, strength 3 for 1 skink and 4 from the Ripper. Its leadership is 5. It's impetuous, which is pretty hard to control. That's the main issue. It's not very damaging with no AP, but lots of attacks per model and very conditional. It has a big burst against 1 target as well, with Toad Rage picking 1 unit to basically give the Ripper 1 extra attack and reroll hit rolls of 1, which is nice, but I'm not really sure what you're meant to put this on. That Rippers can handle well enough and will get there quick enough to kill before it makes an impetuous charge to the wrong target. And bear in mind, it's Fly 9 360 degree charge. It has to charge on a 4+. It's kind of easy to beat. Cleaving blow does help the damage so far, basically granting a mortal wound, to use that term from AOS, against non-monstrous swarms and chariot units. This means you can get through some nasty things, but I don't know. I might take it if I really hate something or as a skink chief boss. I've been talking up the Stegodons a lot in the hero section, and with good reason. They are our heavy chariot, big charger units that slap in combat. It's manned by 5 skinks. They are just the skirmishers, but on a chariot, they are whatever. They fire the big gun and that's their job. The Stegodon, however, is of course why the unit is good. There are 2 options between which Stegodon, either the cheaper and slightly faster Stegodon or the slower but stronger ancient Stegodon. Both get immunity to psychology, Howdah, stubborn, terror, impact D3+1 and stomps D3+2. With it being a behemoth, it's AP -2. That is just a ton of damage from the Stegodon without rolling any to hit rolls. The terror, immunity to psychology and stubborn basically means you want to charge in, ideally rout them, or just stay in combat and grind your enemy under your great stomps of our dinosaurs. And when you want to roll some actual dice, it does have some horn attacks on strength with AP3. The balancing factors of the Stegodon is that given it's basically a chariot rules wise, it's basically weapon skill 2 when being attacked, so you will take a lot of hits, but toughness 6 and 5 wounds means you can somewhat hold on with a 4+. Now, I should actually talk about the Stegodon versus Ancient decision, as it is 15 points a difference, and the regular Stegodon gets initiative 2, but only on strength 5 and weapon skill 3. So if you're wanting more attacks, go this, but the Ancient Stegodon is slower and less attacks, but has strength 6 on all its auto-hitting attacks, which puts the damage output of the Ancient Stegodon just a little bit higher, means you can go for bigger things and not have to worry about wound rolls as much. Another point in its favour is that it has access to the Engines of the Gods for another 25 points. This is instead of a Great Bow, which is a single shot out to 36 inches with poison attacks, AP2 and damage D3, or the Blowpipes, which is 2d6 poison attacks and only 18-inch range. The Engine of the Gods, though, is kinda meh. Arcane Conflagration basically requires you to spend at least 510 points to get a +1 casting roll on wizards within 6 inches of the Engines of the Gods, which is really not great when you can get that for cheaper in other armies, and you're unlikely to have more than 3, maybe 5 if you push it, total units that can make use of it. I would rather they remove the need for 2, but ah well. The other bonus is the bound spell Burning Alignment, which is basically a 15-inch power level 3 fireball, which could be useful for clearing out units a turn before you charge, and the Stegodon wants to be charging. It's why the ranged weapons aren't that important in my opinion. If they had actual War Machine style through and through, I would put some more stock in it. But right now, basically you're either marching to charging, or too far or too close to march for it to be worth it. I briefly want to touch on characters on Stegodons. I know I talked about it previously from a character point of view, but what about from I want a Stegodon, but I also don't have a Carnosaur? I think if you want a basic Stegodon to do some shooting, then take the Chief and maybe give him some buff items so he can get in there and make the Stegodon better. It's going to be at most 310 points for a fully maxed Skink Chief to do a fair bit of damage. From the Ancient Stegodon, that's the Skink Priest, and I think you could do the Engine of the Gods for more spells, but if you stick with Assailment spells and start charging in, then that's a recipe for a good time. It is, however, more expensive, but could also be more fun. I don't really rate it. I think just an Ancient Stegodon on its own, or a Chief on a regular one, is the go-to. If the Stegodon is our charging heavy chariot, then the Bastiladon is somewhat our war machine heavy chariot. It's the lesser of the two beasts, but I like them as they are cheaper and I enjoy the magic missile. Bastiladon itself is good stats and skills. It has bad move 4 and 4 skirmishes on it, so it's not really a melee powerhouse, but reasonably survivable with 4 wounds, toughness 5 and a 3+ save. It's basically got the same skills as a Stegodon, but 1 less stomps and impact hits, and the slower move, and doesn't get to be flanked. It's lesser, but not necessarily worse. It's very much a support monster when we look at its weapons, with the Arc of Sotek, which is the worst option, healing jungle swarms, which I guess I don't really know why I'd want to do that other than just be a pain. Or you could do 2d6 strength 2 hits to a unit within d6 inches, which if it wasn't a random range might be okay. So basically always upgrade this to the Solar Engine. The Solar Engine lets you take a fairly potent Cavalry killer spell with a bound level of 2 looking for a 9+, with 24-inch range. If you succeed, you get 3d3 strength 5 AP2 hits, which might take out a heavy cavalry or two. It also has Solar Radiance, which gives all cold-blooded units, which is all of our units, a +1 to initiative. Another unit I love, but this one is not great. Even Kitbashed and Magnetized, 2 of them, shout out to Lustre Online for that one, but the Troglodon is okay. It's a terror, stompy, not a behemoth. It's just the worst melee monster in Lizardmen, as even the Bastiladon can slap harder. It has poison attacks, but only 3 attacks, and the rider is honestly a bit of a wet noodle. A level 1 non-upgradable wizard, honestly not a character, though, which is kinda nice, but his options are battle magics and illusion. And the last one is hard to get anything off for a level 1, and battle magic, the best shout might be to hope for a fireball or just take some Hammerhand to do damage in melee. Given Hammerhand would double your damage output, it's not a good melee monster. It does get Arcane Vassal and Lore of Lustria, so you can use it to empower the Slan and hold the flank against charges or shooting, but honestly it's not a great unit. It really needs to be a behemoth and maybe upgradable. Oh, and yeah, and it has 1 unit to give all units Furious Charge, but it's a leadership check once per game, so you could just roll a 9, and it's just not worth the 200 points. I would rather save and spend it on a Stegodon or a Bastiladon. I'll rattle through the magic items of importance, but there are more than what I list here. For magic weapons, we have 3 worth noting. Of the 3, the most damaging is the Piranha Blade. For 35 points with raw strength, AP1, 2 wounds, really carrying the damage output. It's cheap enough and good enough that you can really put on any one of your characters and probably get a return on investment. The Scimitar of Sun Resplendent is a bit pricey at 50 points, but could be a good counter against those that are flammable, and bring our old blood close to 9 attacks if you're lucky. Even then, it's not bad and could be comboed with a Paymaster's Coin for a big combo to really nail something. But with no strength bonus and AP1, it's not a hard target killer. That one is the Blade of Reverend Snoochie. 65 points, so comparable to the Ogre Blade, and does far less damage, but it does have value in that it just ignores ward and armor saves, and it gives it some value against something that might just want to ignore stuff with a 2+5+5+. Now that's just a 5+, which is a big difference, and again on the Old Blood or weirdly a Slan, that could be enough damage to just deal with the problem. If you know your meta, this might be the right pick. If not, Ogre Blade or Piranha Blade. Our magical armors are not great. The Mirror Shield is a shield and you get to bounce back a strength 5 AP2 shot back to the caster. Like, cool, I'll take a fireball, you take a single blow from a great weapon from a human. It's not great. Hide with a Cold One, though, gives you your guy's stupidity, but a +1 armor bonus, which is cheaper than most +1 armor trinkets, except for the high elf one, weirdly. If you're on a cold one already, it might be worth taking this one along. Our talisman rock, though, with the glyph necklace, which is basically a talisman of protection for 15 points more, and you get magic resistance too, which is well worth the cost. Basically, one thing can get talisman of protection, and the other one can get this. The aura of Quetzal is less good, but a -1 in combat is fairly decent, and honestly, I'm considering it on something like a Stegodon Chief just to be a real threat. Although this makes our Old Blood only be able to be hit on a 4 or better, even then you need a weapon skill of 7+ to get that 4 up. Our standards are pretty okay, with our standout ones being the Jaguar banner to Pursuit a bit better, so a bit more of a win more banner, the Skaven Pilt banner for Frenzy/Hatred Skaven, and the Sun standard of Chotek for no stand and shoots and a -1 to hit in the shooting phase. That's really nice and is going to help units get into combat and churn through things. Our enchanted items are okay. The Horn one is a bit of a tax for 10 points to get rid of stupidity. I really like Venom of the Firefly Frog to give non-magical weapon Saurus, particularly those with great weapons, auto wounds to mess with Armor of the Ages. It's also good on additional hand weapons for maximum dice. I like it, but it's not an auto pick. The Cloak of the Feathers is something I can't really think of a reason to take, so I think I'll pass here, even if it is a bit of classic. The arcane items are kind of meh. The big one that might be useful is the Cube of Darkness to knock out any and all remains in place spells and just auto dispel something nasty, but the others really aren't worth it. So that was my very long video on the Lizardman Legacy Army list for the Old World. Lizardmen are in a decent but not amazing place, pretty much bang in the middle of what I expect from a Legacy Army list. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, let me know, and I'll maybe do one for Dwarfs in a few months, and maybe even talk about the Old World more. If we ever get any updates, I'd be down to cover the Lizardmen stuff. I also got bored and wrote a fan-made arcane journal, so maybe I'll work on that and cover it at some point just to get it out there properly in front of the community. If you would like that, please let me know. Remember to like and subscribe for more, and as always, thank you so much for watching.